So the impunity from accountability is so important in even the actual behavior of otherwise sophisticated scientific kind of activities. The evidence shows that the NHS is impune, or the NHS personnel are given impunity, in effect, that is de facto impunity, although they are not given impunity de jure or de jure. That is to say, officially they are not allowed to claim impunity, but they are in effect granted impunity, which is why there is no investigation into the behavior of the NHS institutions and agencies, and there is no official data about the number of misconduct carried out, perpetrated by the personnel in each of the organizations within the NHS bureaucracy. For example, the various cases that concern the Royal London Hospital neglecting or being found to be openly determined to kill children that are very seriously in need of serious care, highlighted by the case of the parents from Newham, whose child was saved from being murdered by the Royal London Hospital because the parents were able to use the court system. We shall come to that rare use of the court system in due course, not necessarily in this part, but we shall be doing that in due course in terms of the updating and contextual updating of what goes on in NHS institutions. And long before the pandemic, many hospitals, NHS hospitals, have been murdering patients by putting them aside and not treating them, and putting them on one side until they die. There has been no report about this, but this is going on. And parents of children, as well as children of elderly patients who die in that way, know this. And they can't go to any forum seeking the truth about how their child or children or their parents, elderly parents, were killed. And there is no mention of this in the Fleet Street Papers, which have only begun to use the term DNR after the pandemic appeared. Doctors have been putting tags on patients, beds or bodies, with the thing called DNR, do not resuscitate. And the majority of the victims of the DNR have been, so far as reported, without naming, most of the victims have been elderly people. And there is no outcry. There is no outcry whatsoever. There should be outcry if one single person is treated in that way, mistreated in that way, killed in that way. But there have been thousands of people murdered under the cover of the emergency, whatever the emergency cover. And no doctor, nor nurse, nor NHS executive or healthcare so-called executive has been prosecuted for this, which they should be. So extrapolate this and include all the other agencies that are relied on and depended on by the state and by the ordinary people as being the last port of call in an emergency, they have been impugned from accountability. And as I was saying, when the foundation of the NHS was kind of launched, the Labour Party jumped on it and made it a habit to claim credit for creating the NHS. To this day, 75 years on, the Labour Party has not come to admitting this impunity and the failure to train people, objectively speaking, assuming there is no impunity. Because there shouldn't be any impunity whatsoever in the NHS. But there is, because there is no accountability. And there is no accountability because the people making the biggest claims about the NHS are the people who don't recognize the rights of the patients. And the worst example of the Labour Party failing, letting down millions of patients over the last 75 years has been the personality of Jeremy Corbyn. Corbyn is a habitual liar when it comes to the rights of the victims of the what he calls workers. Workers' negligence and murderous plots and indifference and contempt and prejudice in places like the hospitals, never acknowledged by Jeremy Corbyn. Never. He calls them workers. And these killers have been elevated to the level of semi-deity, like the NHS clap for NHS workers that went on for months. Of course, the people who risk their lives and safety for the help they gave to others must be acknowledged and recognized. But that is only part of the equation. The other part is that they should be held to account when they commit murders and when they, in effect, commit manslaughter, which happens more often than murders. And I'm making a distinction technically between murder and manslaughter because of the various components and ingredients that constitute the two things individually. And the Labour Party is silent. Of course, the Tory Party is silent, very much so. And what are the in-betweeners doing, like the so-called Greens, the Lib Dems? Well, the Lib Dems are a murderous party because Ed Davey and Joe Swinson, when they appeared to be interviewed by the Cathy Newman on Channel 4 News, during the short kind of campaign for leadership of the Lib Dems after Vince Cable quit, Cathy Newman stupidly, fascistically, and idiotically, and mass murderously asked them this surprise question: would you press the nuclear button? And both of them rushed to say yes. Now, if somebody like Cathy Newman, who is being painted as a symbol of the power of the woman in Fleet Street or in broadcast media in Britain, then let's examine her record. She's a racist. She's a liar who plotted to report fake excesses by Muslims in a South London mosque. And she's the one that asked this question of Ed Davey and Joe Swinson without any preparation at all. There is no evidence that the world needs war. So what nuclear button was she thinking of? Where? On what planet? Fleet Street hasn't asked this question. They haven't raised this question. Nor has the Channel 4 itself, which should have been apologizing for this and explaining why Kathy Newman, a fascistic mass murderess in agenda in terms of outlook, should not be exposed for what she is, but she is paraded as an achiever, as a woman who has achieved. Mass murder is not an achievement. It's a crime against humanity. And no newspaper in Fleet Street has raised this question. So what we are saying about the NHS being impugned is because the media, the mainstream media, is produced by people like Kathy Newman, who are not in business to provide news. They are in business to promote an agenda and a narrative, which is a mass murdering narrative and agenda. There is something very seriously wrong with the media then, when it comes to safeguarding the welfare and safety of the people exposed to not only the pandemic but other illnesses and diseases, and who legitimately need health care at the point of need. Kathy Newman is not advocating anything to do with the NHS at all, except when she can put one tag here, one tag there, and create a caricature, a montage of kind of different, conflicting slogans, and bring it to the gullible viewers, presenting it as a very sophisticated and clever and intelligent report, which is absolutely not the case. When Kathy Newman came to Tower Hamlets at the relevant election, whenever the election was, either 2014 or another election time, Kathy Newman allegedly reported on the vote fraud and bogus registration of electors in a number of addresses in London E3 in the Bow area. She appeared to be. But despite the few minutes Channel 4 News gave to her presentation, it was completely contradictory and had no connection with ordinary people and no connection with any concept of opposing corruption by and in and through Tower Hamlets Council. And what Kathy Newman left out is also left out by the Fleet Street papers. They don't delve into the details. They don't give the truth to the readers or the viewers or the listeners, if it is a radio version as well of the television kind of equivalent. So for 75 years, the NHS has been allowed to struggle in a deliberately created state of financial, administrative, ethical, and moral uncertainty, which is why they are not having enough resources or enough personnel trained to take over the running of the empty hospitals now, the Nightingale hospitals that were very speedily kind of constructed or got together during the first months of the virus hitting the UK during February and March 2020. This is 23rd of December 2020, just a week before the end of this year. And there is no evidence that any of the negligent behavior by the government of the day about the need to equip the National Health Service organization with the necessary skills, capacity, ability, and the attitude. It hasn't changed. And the reason why it hasn't changed is because there is no political pressure. And the reason why there is no political pressure is because the mass media, the Fleet Street papers and the mainstream media that people still kind of treat as more kind of reliable than the so-called social media. These Fleet Street papers and the media are controlled by several conglomerates and gangsters, big business gangsters, who essentially support the ideology and the narrative and the agenda of the current Boris Johnson fronted cabal, and they do that whenever anyone else fronts the government, because all of them, all the fronters of the cabal in power in the name of the government of the UK for the last 40 years have been agents of big business or colluders with big business, complicit with big business. And big business is incompatible with health, safety.